Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. On today's episode of me talking about 7 things, I'm going to be going over episode 2 of Apocalypse, titled No Fury Like a Woman Thorned. Before I continue, please check out the links in the description below. I would highly recommend the Castaway survey. Please check that out if you have not already, and share the link if you would like. Now we are on day 3, and at the start of the episode, we see Stephen, Kelly, Wes, and Miranda check out a compound that has a lot of bones in it, and they decide to fortify their shelter, and it looks really good. And they decide to prioritize food later on the next day and whatnot. And then Steven Lee Hall Jr. and Alexa go looking for food, but don't really find anything. They have an encounter with the bull elephant, but everything turns out okay. And the group decides to check out a secondary water source that is a little over a mile away. While trekking, they comment on the heat and the thorns. And then when they get there, they see there's a lot of life inside the water, and they see a lot of foot traffic around the water source. So since Frank is a hunter, he decides to find a good spot to set up a blind. And he also spots a monitor lizard in a tree, and the group tries to get it, but it hides in the water and they're unable to get it. And then they decide to go back to their camp and get some fishing materials ready for when they go fishing the next day. Alexa brought fishing line, but unfortunately she did not have hooks, so Frank makes some hooks out of acacia thorns, and they have nuts and bolts that they can use as sinkers, and they also have spears that they're making as well for fishing. Waz, Russell, and Teal go exploring for food and check out the waterhole to see if they can get fish. After a few unsuccessful attempts with the passive fishing line and the net that Teal brought, Waz decides to go up to one of the walls on the side of their water source to try to scare the fish out of their holes, and that ends up being successful because the fish, to get out of the extreme temperature, they burrow underground or in the sides of the walls, and Waz was able to find a bunch, and they make fish soup. And during the night, there is an elephant that walks near their shelter, and they build up their fire to try to deter it. Amber and Joe look for food and gather water respectively. Joe has a plastic container and he gathers water that way. And then Joe says he and Amber are kind of on the same page while he and Kel are not meshing. He tried to set a boundary by saying she shouldn't interrupt him, but there's still a lot of tension. Amber talks about tiffing with past partners, mainly Trish and a little bit Jen, and then Jeff came in and it was kind of them versus her, and she talks about being on the outside, and it was really upsetting for her, and so she tries to mediate a talk between them. They try to talk it out, and Joe says he did act aggressively after getting hit in the head with a stick twice because of where they are, and he thought an animal had gotten through the boma, and so he was on high alert and very anxious, and so he apologizes for throwing the stick, but wished that Kel would apologize. Instead of apologizing, Kel kind of makes excuses / just kind of talks about the situation and her perspective, but Joe really wants an apology, but he doesn't get it. And so, unfortunately, they don't really mend fences, and Joe mentions that he and Kel are oil and water and should only interact when absolutely necessary. The group works on their permanent shelter a little bit before going back to their water source, and Amber mentions, again, her time on XL Season 8 and knowing what it's like to be in Kel's position and not being appreciated, and she tries her best to support her, but unfortunately, while walking through the trees and whatnot, a thorn hits her in the eye, and she's in a lot of pain and her eyes are watering, and her nose is also leaking, and she can't open her eye, and a medic is called. And I think that we've seen the medic Jared before. I can't remember if he was on an XL or what, but I think we've seen him before. And then he says she probably got a thorn from a sickle bush, and then she gets an antibiotic eye wash. If her symptoms intensify, then she will need more washes and may need some optical scans. And she will have her eye checked later, and she's worried because she doesn't want to leave. She wants to stay in the challenge and help her team. And Amber and Kel discuss Kel and Joe's interactions, and Kel says she wants to split from the group because of irreconcilable differences. And Joe does some camp chores while this is all happening, and Amber says she will help Kel find another group the next day. They tell Joe, and he's sorry he didn't work out, and her skills will be missed. Also, Amber was worried earlier because with all the tiffing and arguing and the peace treaty talks, not a lot of work was done on their shelter, and the peace treaty talks didn't work out, so she was also worried about that as well. And on day 4, Teal checks out the elephant track that's near their shelter. Waz, Russell, and Teal began working on another boma around 20 yards from their water source. They found an old cattle corral to help get materials to make a fence and boma. Russell needs to take a breather after working for a little bit, and Teal and Waz are a little bit annoyed about him taking so many breaks, and they make great progress on their wall while Russell is resting. And during his talking head, he has trouble breathing, and the medic says that Russell is having a panic attack, and it passes and he's cleared to continue. Teal and Waz return to the old boma to chat with Russell, and he says he can't really continue and decides to tap from the challenge. So Russell is the first person to tap from the challenge, one of 2 in this episode, and he leaves his bow and heads out. He talks about the unrelenting heat from the sun, and Teal and Waz continue working on their shelter even during the high heat. And we see a little vignette of Waz trying to figure out what happened in the abandoned house and kind of creating a story as to who lived there and what happened and whatnot. Amber's eye is most likely infected and causing her a lot of pain. She and Kel set out on a 2-mile trek to another water source, and Joe stays back to continue working on the boma. And Amber and Kel are trekking in really high heat, and they finish off their water but are still dehydrated. And Joe talks about his previous challenge and how his partner left on day 5 and how he doesn't really want to be alone again. And he says he's glad Amber is still there so he can work with her. And he works on making a raised cot so she can be comfortable when she gets back. And while Amber and Kel are walking, they hear voices and call out, and there's hints that every group can hear them, but it's sort of a, which group are they going to merge with? And then there's a commercial break, and when we come back, it turns out that they are near Wes, Miranda, and Stephen Kelly's camp. And so the 2 come in and they get some water, and Amber explains the situation. Wes is concerned about the changing dynamics, and his group decides to merge with Kel. Wes also wants Amber to get hydrated, but is worried about the risk involved of her going all the way back and trekking in the heat. And Amber decides to head back almost immediately to go back to her old camp with Joe. The heat is intense. She's dehydrated. Her eye is in a lot of pain. And finally, she gets back and she gets another antibiotic flush, and she is just in a lot of pain, and she has signs of infection, and there may be thorn fragments in her eye. And the medics decide to med tap her so that she can get an optical scan to see if there are any fragments in there and treat her. And so Joe is devastated that she has to leave, and he's by himself in Africa once again. And Amber got antibiotics and a cornea scan. Future Gabe here, after reviewing some social media posts, it turns out Amber did have a small fragment of thorn in her eye and a scratch on her cornea, but during the episode they said that she didn't have any, but she got the fragments removed and she got antibiotics and she is recovering fine, as far as I know. Wes goes out hunting and notes the lack of resources. There are not many places for him to hide and hunt effectively. Miranda works on making a fish hook. She gets a lizard to use as fish bait, and she spots a belly slide from a crocodile near their water source, and she and Steven decide to do some fishing, and hopefully they don't run into the croc when that happens. And Miranda's getting overheated and mentions how the lack of food is causing her to not have as much energy, and she has to take a breather. And Wes and Steven go fishing while Kel works on camp chores. And Wes and Steven spot the croc, and Wes wants to make a plan to try to catch the croc and eat it. Steven Lee Hall Jr., Alex, and Frank trek to the second water source in 107-degree heat. Steven and Alexa are putting in some fishing lines while Frank works on a blind and begins hunting. And then Steven and Alexa head back to camp and work on boiling a lot of water really quickly to rehydrate faster and make sure there's water for Frank when he gets back. And Frank is patiently waiting to hunt and hopefully get a meal. He takes a shot at a warthog but misses. And then the episode ends with Joe talking about being alone for the next 30 days potentially and needing to last and in the challenge despite everything that's happened. And the episode is over, and as of day 4, Steven Lee Hall Jr. has 276 days, Waz has 144, Wes has 100, Frank has 39, Alexa, Joe, Kelly, Miranda, Stephen, Kelly, and Teal have 25. And we had 2 tap outs this episode, Russell, who has 79 days, and Amber, who has 150. So, yeah, 2 days over 1 episode. That's crazy, even though Joe said it's day 5, but I can't remember them saying day 5. I don't know. Maybe it was day 5, but they never explained that to us, but oh well. So thank you all so much for listening. Please like, comment nice things, and subscribe. Episode 3, Dropping Like Zombies. Wes and Stephen Kelly scavenge materials to take on their crocodile nemesis. Lions stalk Waz and Teal. A survivalist scores the first big game of the challenge. A rogue elephant targets Joe. The wasteland forces 2 more to bow out. And who I think is going... Skip ahead if you don't want to hear, but I think that Miranda and Kel are tapped next episode. And with that, thank you so much. Bye-bye.